In 2019, Toho began a Godzilla Room division devoted to planning new Godzilla projects. Following the completion of his film The Great War of Archimedes that same year, producer Minami Ichikawa appointed renowned filmmaker Takashi Yamazaki to make Toho's next Godzilla film, Godzilla Minus One.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham and I'm here along with Chris. And today, this is a film that I personally have been waiting to do on this podcast. And it's a film I seen when it came out. I believe it was December 1st. It came out here in the United States. And it's Godzilla Minus One. I mean, this film, the first time I heard that Toho was making another film, I was super excited. We kept getting teasers of it, minus one, what does that mean, and stuff like that. And I got to the theater and I was just absolutely blown away. I went with my daughter's mom, and then I went a second time a couple weeks later with a buddy of mine, and my mom went with me. And even the second time, I was blown away, and I loved the film. And ever since it's been released on Netflix, I've watched it quite a few times already, and it's easy to turn on and just let the film play because we'll get into more of it. But I love the characters, I love the score. I mean, this is in Chris's words, this is a G tier Godzilla film.
Yes, absolutely. G tier. I think I remember back when it was rumored and like the hot rumored title that everyone loved to call it was Godzilla Zero. That was the thing that people would kind of call it for shorthand because it didn't have an official title. But like they dropped the logo, and so people were like, "Oh, is it called Godzilla Zero? Is it called Godzilla Zero because it's like a prequel or an origin or a reboot back to the period piece, you know?" And then it came out Godzilla Minus One, and I saw it the opening day in an IMAX, and then one of my rewatches was in Screen X with the peripheral screens on the side with the expanded image, which this didn't do a ton, but for the scenes that it did do it, it was very impactful. And then I saw it once in like a standard showing with my younger brother, and then when they did minus minus color, I saw it one more time. So I think I got a total of 4 showings in theaters. Maybe there was a fifth one, but I think it was 4 altogether.
How was minus color? I have not got to see that yet.
It was, I feel like there are people on both ends of the aisle with because Logan had like Logan Noir, and Mad Max Fury Road had the shiny and chrome version, these black and white versions. Zack Snyder's Justice League did the Justice is Gray. I usually have never watched any of those, and I feel you get people on both sides where some people are like, "Oh my gosh, you haven't seen it till you've seen it this way. It's a totally different tone and experience." And then there are some people that are just like, "Oh well, it's the same exact thing. It's just in black and white. It doesn't make a difference. Who cares?" I think it's somewhere in between there. It is essentially the same exact movie. I think there's at least one point where I think it's when the atomic test goes off and you get the close up of Godzilla's eye as it's mutated from the radiation. In Minus One, they use a roar that is more of the 1954 vintage roar from the black and white original film than and in the color version it's more of like a modern roar. I don't know if there are any other changes to the audio or anything like that. There's certainly no difference in footage, but apparently they did reevaluate every like visual effects shot and composite and everything to make sure that it was tuned to look best for black and white when they did this minus color version. They didn't just take all the color out and call it a day. They did go in and tweak tweak things to make sure that it was like adjusted technically for black and white. I'm someone that I will always just opt to watch it in color. Seeing it in black and white is certainly, it's an interesting thing, and it'd be like a cool bonus feature on a Blu-ray set or something. But it's not one of those things where it's like, how people describe listening to music on vinyl or something. It's not one of those like, you haven't seen it unless you've seen it in minus color. It's not that dramatic of a difference.
Okay, because I did want to watch it in minus color, so it's almost like once you see it once in minus without the color, like or in black and white, that's more than enough.
Yeah, and perhaps when people really get to analyze both versions, maybe there are more than a handful of those audio alterations. I know there's only one that I've seen an example of, like a side by side. Maybe there's a bunch of those throughout, and maybe little things like that. Maybe some of the effect shots actually look overtly better. Maybe there's a lot of little things like that someone with a more technical eye might be able to watch and say, okay, I qualitatively prefer the black and white to the color. But for me, I'm like, I tend to prefer a movie in color. I get the fun of the black and white thing, but people shot in black and white because black and white was the only option. I know sometimes people choose it creatively, but for me, I'm like, I'd rather just watch the movie in color.
Either way, color or black and white, I feel like this film was given a
And
lot.
one cool thing I will say is that the Toho logo at the beginning is also the vintage Toho logo from the original 54 movie, the old grainy Toho logo. They replaced like the new modern Toho logo with that. So I thought that was very cool too. That was a very nice touch. So it gives it that period feel. So I mean, it's a fun alternate cut of the movie. It's not this like totally different experience.
Boy, I'll make sure I check it out at least once. It'd be
Yeah.
just like seeing the 54 version in color. You might as well
Yeah.
check it out at least once.
Yeah, I would wager that whoever ends up getting the home disc rights to this film in North America, fingers crossed that it's someone like Criterion, that they would have both versions in one release. I don't think they would release it as two different ones.
Plus, they're money hungry. Who knows? You never know who's gonna. All the Godzilla fans that are out there, they might buy both discs.
Yeah, gosh, yeah, I know that's the sad thing. We're infinite suckers.
Well, let me go ahead and give you some background information on Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One is a 2023 Japanese kaiju film written and directed by Takashi Yamazaki, with visual special effects supervised by Yamazaki and directed by Kyoko Shibuya. Funded by Toho and produced by Toho Studios, it stars Ryunosuke Kamiki, Minami Hamabi, Yuki Yamada, Minataka Aoki, Hidetaka Yoshiaka, Sakura Ando, and Kiranasuke Sasaki. It is the 30th mainline installment in the Godzilla series, 37th Godzilla film overall, and 5th film in the franchise's Reiwa era. The film premiered on November 1st, 2023, closing out the 36th Tokyo International Film Festival. Toho released it to more than 500 Japanese theaters beginning November 3rd, the same day that the original Godzilla premiered in 1954. And the film had its U.S. premiere at the Directors Guild of America on November 10th, while Toho International brought it to the 2,300 North American screens beginning December 1st. Though the film's Japanese release coincided with Godzilla's franchise's 69th anniversary, it officially commemorates the 70th anniversary, which will occur this year in 2024. And then a regraded black and white version of the film, as we were just talking about, Godzilla Minus One Minus Color, premiered in Japanese theaters on January 12th of this year, 2024, and opened in North America on January 26th. So there's a little background on Godzilla Minus One.
Yeah, and one of my favorite interesting things is that Takashi Yamazaki, this is the first time that the credit of director, writer, and visual effects supervisor was all occupied by one guy for a Godzilla film. He's definitely, he's pulling triple duty here. So hats off to him for being so in charge and responsible for so much of what we see about this movie.
Yeah, this God, I've been waiting, as soon as we found out about this film, I believe we might have been somewhat through the Heisei era or so on talking about our recordings or something. And
Mhm.
I ever since the trailers, you like to stay away from the trailers, and I try to,
Well,
but I can't. I'm a weakling.
I watched them all at least once, but then I kind of say like, okay, now I need to try and just let as much of that memory get fuzzy, so that I can then, uh, go into the movie with a little bit of a semblance of being totally fresh. Like those frame by frame analyses, like they can be fun, but sometimes they just like they embed entire aspects of the movie into your brain, and you're getting less surprise.
Yeah, I'm one of those that I see it and I want to send it to everyone that knows I'm a Godzilla nerd. Like, hey, check
Yeah.
this out, another
Well,
one.
yeah, well, in some Japanese promos, and not that I'm intimately aware of it, but it always seems like the initial stuff is always very teasy and very sort of doesn't show a lot. But then that once the movie gets really close to release, and certainly I was worried once it released in Japan but wasn't in America, they just start like showing stuff. It seems like they just like throw out spoilers, like not like major spoilers, but so I just wanted to be very cagey about what I was looking at, especially when it was out in Japan but not in America yet. I'm like, this is the window where a whole country of people knows exactly what this movie is and is about beginning to end, and I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get any of it ruined for the next month.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, I mean, they could have shown plenty of this movie, and there would have been plenty more for us to figure out and find out in theaters about it. Because this is one that it it's emotional. It's a roller coaster ride. It's a little bit of everything in a Godzilla film.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think there's a conversation that can be had without putting this Godzilla as one of the all-time greats. I mean, it's tough, and there's a lot of movies to choose from, and recency bias is always a thing. But it's like, how is minus one like not easily in like your top three? I don't know.
I am not going to disagree with you, but the quicker we get through our trailer and plot synopsis, the quicker we can dive into more of the good stuff. So I will go ahead and drop a trailer on Godzilla Minus One in here. We'll get a plot synopsis rolling, and we'll get on to the good stuff.
どういうことだわかりません何かでかいのが
あれはゴジラ。
なんで俺たちこんなところに呼ばれたんですか
政府はこの情報を国民に伏せています。
誰かが貧乏口引かなきゃなんねんだよ。
みんな死んだぞ
この恥知らず。
その怪物は許しちゃくれない。
ゴジラマイナスワン。
In 1945, near the end of World War II, kamikaze pilot Koichi Shikishima lands his Mitsubishi A6M0 for repairs at the Japanese base on Odo Island. Lead mechanic Sosaku Tachibana deduces that Shikishima is feigning technical issues to flee from his duty. That night, Godzilla, a large dinosaur-like creature, attacks the garrison. Tachibana tells Shikishima to fire at the monster from his plane, but he panics, fails to shoot, and is knocked unconscious. When he awakens the following day, he finds Tachibana is the only other survivor, who is furious at him for failing to act. Shikishima returns home to find his parents were killed in the bombing of Tokyo. Plagued by survivor's guilt, he begins supporting a woman, Noriko Oishi, whose parents also died in the bombing, and an orphan baby, Akiko, whom Noriko rescued. He finds employment aboard a minesweeper tasked with disposing of naval mines from World War II. Meanwhile, Godzilla is mutated and empowered by the United States nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. It sinks the USS Redfish and destroys several other ships en route to Japan. Owing to tensions with the Soviet Union, the US offers no help, save for a few decommissioned Imperial Japanese Navy vessels approved by General Douglas MacArthur. The Japanese government, concerned about inducing panic, does not notify the public about the danger. In May 1947, Shikishima and his minesweeper crew travel to the Ogasawara Islands and are tasked with stalling Godzilla's approach to Japan. They release a mine into Godzilla's mouth and detonate it, causing significant damage, but it quickly regenerates. The heavy cruiser Takao then engages Godzilla, but is destroyed when the monster unleashes its heat ray. After returning to Tokyo, Shikishima opens up to Noriko about his encounters with Godzilla. Days later, Godzilla makes landfall in Japan and attacks Ginza, where Noriko works. She narrowly survives the initial attack and reunites with Shikishima. Enraged by tank fire, Godzilla obliterates much of the district with its heat ray, killing tens of thousands. Noriko pushes Shikishima to safety, but is caught in the blast and presumed dead. Devastated by the loss, Shikishima vows revenge. Frustrated by the government's inaction, one of the Minesweeper's crew, former naval engineer Kenji Noda, devises a plan to destroy Godzilla by luring it out to Sagami Bay before surrounding it with Freon tanks and rupturing them, lowering the water's buoyancy and sinking it, letting the resultant water pressure crush it. Should the plan fail, balloons will be inflated under Godzilla to force it back up, killing it through explosive decompression. To enact his plan, Noda has recruited Navy veterans to crew disarmed IJN destroyers. Shikishima recruits Tachibana to repair a broken-down Kyushu J-7W Shinden fighter. He plans to kill Godzilla in a suicide attack by flying into its mouth and detonating explosive charges on board. He leaves Akiko in the care of his neighbor Sumiko before Godzilla resurfaces. As Shikishima lures Godzilla to the trap set by the two destroyers, Sumiko receives a telegram intended for Shikishima. Godzilla survives the initial plunge and then breaks free before being forced back up, sustaining serious injuries from the resultant decompression-induced barotrauma. With the help of a fleet of tugboats organized by Mizushima, another crewmate from the Minesweeper, the ships haul Godzilla to the surface. Enraged, Godzilla prepares to destroy all the vessels with its heat ray, but Shikishima crashes the plane into Godzilla's mouth and destroys its head, causing the energy of the heat ray to tear its body apart. The crew celebrates as Shikishima ejects before the explosion and parachutes to safety, using an ejection seat that Tachibana installed in the Shinden, imploring him to let go of his guilt and continue living. Upon returning home, Sumiko gives Shikishima the telegram, which leads him to a hospital where he reunites with Noriko, who survived the destruction but has a black bruise creeping up her neck. Meanwhile, a chunk of Godzilla's flesh begins to regenerate as it sinks into the ocean.
All right, you want me to I got quite a bit of fun facts for this. I got some quick numbers. Which one do you want first?
Dude, unleash the fun facts. Why not? Because when we get to numbers, I'll talk about it a little bit too. So.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's get into some fun facts on Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One is the first Toho-produced film in the Godzilla series to gross over $100 million worldwide. Godzilla Minus One is the first Godzilla film to be nominated for an Academy Award as well as to win the award outright, which is awesome. Fully deserved.
Yeah, and specifically the first Japanese film of any kind to win the Best Visual Effects Oscar. Which,
and man,
which is a great thing, because for the 70th anniversary of the original film, which had groundbreaking visual effects back then, but the Godzilla franchise was famously never really recognized as a pioneer for visual effects. And I remember one critic even lamented the fact that in the 70s, the remake of King Kong won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, and it used suitmation as its main style for executing King Kong on screen, was a man in a suit. And that had been something that the Godzilla franchise had been doing for decades and had never really been praised or recognized in any significant way. So it felt like King Kong was doing it 20 years later and wins an Oscar for it. So it's nice to see Godzilla now a Toho Godzilla movie, no less, using CGI and winning the Best Visual Effects Oscar because of it. It's pretty nice to see.
Yeah, I feel like every time I watch this movie that it just looks more clear and more realistic and stuff, and I love it. Godzilla Minus One's 12 nominations at the Japan Academy Film Prize also set a record for the Godzilla series, surpassing the 10 nominations from Shin Godzilla in 2016.
Yeah, which that is essentially their equivalent of the Oscars. So the fact that this cleaned up with the award shows over there and won a pretty prestigious and won a handful of minor awards over here as well, like that says something. That's great. It's great to see.
Like I said, this film was given a lot of love in, directing and acting, production, everything.
Yeah, the final worldwide gross of the 115.8 million is hands down the highest worldwide box office performance of a Toho Godzilla movie. So that's a pretty significant feat to have accomplished.
Absolutely. I mean, that's we'll get into budget and all that. Godzilla Minus One's runtime of 125 minutes ties it with Godzilla Final Wars from 2004 as the longest Japanese Godzilla film.
Which is wild. I love that, I think that Godzilla 98 at almost 140 minutes is always going to remain as the longest Godzilla movie. And, I like that they, I think Minus One, pardon me. I think that Shin Godzilla was also just a few minutes shy of this 125 minute mark. So I think it's a good, I think maximum 2 hours is about where most of these movies should fall, like that 100 to 120 minute kind of a range,
Yeah, I mean this one has a pretty good pace to it. There are some that are around the 2 hour mark that have parts that drag, but this one gets you through it pretty quick.
I mean, Lord, there are some of them that are 90 minutes that feel like they're pulling teeth,
100% agree with that. I won't throw out any names.
Looking at the anime trilogy a little bit.
This is the first Godzilla movie to be primarily set before 1954, but it is not the first time that an earlier setting has ever been depicted, as Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah involves characters time traveling to 1944. I thought you would love that one.
Yeah, well, and what I'll say is that I do appreciate that this, because I always liked the idea of the sort of proto-Godzillasaurus being seen in the World War II setting before the bombs go off, and that being like an origin for Godzilla. So it lifts that from Godzilla versus King Ghidorah quite beautifully without all of the garbage nonsense time travel whatever. So it's actually like it takes the good thing about Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and uses it for a new reboot, which I really like a lot.
Absolutely, and I think they do it better. I think they knock it out of the park.
Yeah, and it just further, I'm always in this camp of like Godzilla being a Pokemon-like character that mutates and changes however he needs to and adapts and evolves however he needs to. Shin Godzilla, he has like 3 or 4 major forms. I'm always a fan of Godzilla having multiple forms. He evolves across the MonsterVerse films, So I always like seeing that. I just always enjoy seeing that. Because in my head canon, G98 was just some kind of weird like proto Godzilla that hadn't really become proper Godzilla yet.
Still, we'll just say he was still growing.
Exactly. Yeah, he wasn't quite there yet.
Godzilla Minus One is only the 5th Godzilla film in which Godzilla is the sole giant monster present, after the original Godzilla from 1954, The Return of Godzilla from 1984, Godzilla 1998, Shin Godzilla from 2016, and then Godzilla Minus One.
Yeah, we're starting to now get into a bit of a, it's interesting that Toho, as far as this Reiwa era and their live action films, they've now done 2 consecutive solo Godzilla movies with Shin Godzilla and Minus One, which is wild for them considering how rare solo Godzilla movies were in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard rumors on a sequel for this one with the director wanting to bring in other monsters, but nothing set in stone yet.
Yeah, and yeah, and I mean, and it's a shame because when Shin Godzilla came out, a lot of people would have been all for getting a Shin Godzilla sequel, and there were rumors of that, and then now Minus One is out, and people are dying. It's like it will feel like Toho is kind of like hating money if they don't pursue some kind of continuation of Godzilla Minus One. I understand wanting to let different directors come in and just do these one-off unique movies and takes, but I mean, Minus One is so kind of globally recognized and praised and talked up in the online communities and film critics and whatnot that it's like it's got all this energy to it. When it debuted first movie ever to debut as #1 on Netflix and iTunes at the same time. So it's like clearly it's got a lot of attention and momentum. So you would hope that they would want to continue it in a more traditional sense by making a direct sequel. Cut the blank check for Yamazaki and let him do what he wants.
Man, fingers crossed. Similar to Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla Minus One first showed Godzilla as a dinosaur-like creature on a remote Pacific island in World War II, although he battles Japanese repairmen instead of American soldiers. And he is also confirmed to have been mutated by American nuclear testing in the Pacific, but this time in 1946, not in 1954.
Yeah, it was Operation Crossroads in this film that turned Dino Godzilla into proper Godzilla, which if you ever do a little bit of looking into of Operation Crossroads, I think in the way that one played out or occurred or was executed, I think that was actually like the worst test in terms of the damage or the amount of radiation or the results of it. I think that was the worst one of all of them. Like Operation Crossroads was like a big, that one was really 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 kind of damaging and destructive in terms of what it did or what it would have done, considering it was a test. So yeah, it's kind of cool that they plucked that one out for the timeline to be the one that makes Godzilla, because uh, the other one in the 54 film, those tests were just done historically in March of 54. So obviously, this one being done in the 40s, the same tests, the hydrogen bomb tests couldn't be the ones that made Godzilla in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll run through these last couple for you quick, and we'll get on to some numbers on Godzilla Minus One. The scene in which Godzilla clashes with the Takao is similar to the Tasman Sea battle scene from Godzilla vs. Kong. In both cases, Godzilla clambers onto a military vessel, is repulsed and knocked back into the ocean, then fires atomic breath to destroy the ship from below.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things is that with a franchise like this, whether it's intentional or unintentional, so much of the imagery and iconography and scenarios are so, common across all of the films that you often get these references and connections, whether they're intended to or not. There's also an overhead shot that shows Godzilla swimming underneath a ship in the water that is very much like a shot that was done in Godzilla 2014. So there's also, and after G98, you saw a lot of the Millennium movies do the kind of the water ripple as Godzilla approached the shore with the fins breaking through. That was a piece of imagery that kind of came out of G98 that was then emulated in some of the other movies. So I love it when Godzilla movies have these things, these connective threads between them. Like I just think it makes it all feel much more like it is one just big, happy franchise.
Yeah, it is. I mean, directors seem to kind of feed off each other. Like they see what another director did, so they want to kind of like do it their own way, but kind of improve it or do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Just give it a different take. I love it.
Director Takashi Yamazaki's favorite Godzilla film is Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all at attack. And he acknowledged it as an unconscious influence on Godzilla Minus One. In both films, Godzilla intentionally destroys cities and tramples on fleeing humans. His atomic breath creates a mushroom cloud. The finishing blow against the monster is dealt by a single pilot craft attacking him from the inside as he attempts to fire his atomic breath. And the final shot of the film shows that a small piece of him is still alive.
Yeah, and Yeah, I mean, and you can see those. There's also moments where when Godzilla is revving up his atomic blast in both GMK and minus one, you see it kind of at the mouth area, you see it kind of pulling in the kind of energy or the air from around it, and so that was a thing that was kind of first shown in GMK, and you see it here again. There's a lot of fun aesthetic nods to GMK, which GMK is another really really great Godzilla movie. It's probably the first or second best of the Millennium series. So
And we did that like 7 or 8 episodes ago. So go ahead and check that one out.
yeah, exactly. He's got the white pupils in that movie. He's got the demon eyes. It's an iconic look.
It is. It is a top tier Godzilla design for the Millennium era. All right, my last one for you here is all 610 of the film's visual effects shots were handled by a crew of 35 artists at Shiragumi's Shofu Studio under the supervision of Yamazaki and direction of Kyoko Shibuya. According to the Los Angeles Times, between a quarter and a third of the film's budget was spent on the visual effects.
Which is crazy because you would think that, I mean, they could have said like 3/4 of the film's budget was spent on the CGI, and you would believe it. And the interesting thing about the budget of this film is, officially on Wikipedia, it's reported as 10 to 12 million, but then there was some interview with someone that got translated where they were kind of insistent. They were like, it was actually less than 10 million, like under 10 million is what it was. And now I'm sure it was over 9. I'm sure it was somewhere between 9 and 10, but the fact that it's even that, because at first they were like 15, and there was an interview where the director was like, I wish it was 15. And then people were like, oh, so that means it's got to be more like 10 to 12. And then it came out that it's like, no, it was probably just under 10, which is mind blowing to think about.
See, and that's what I got in my numbers here is a budget of $12 million. Everywhere I looked, it was like 12 million. I found one 15 million, but a lot of them were 12. So I was like, all right, well, if that's what most sites are leaning towards, we'll just say it was $12 million.
Yeah, and I mean, apparently, I mean, I think 10 is reasonable to say, but apparently it was not even quite 10, according to one person. That's one quote that was translated. But I mean, still, either way, even if it was 15, even if you round up and say 15, it's mind blowing that the film looks as good as it does. I believe you said it had something like 600 visual effects shots, something like that, 610.
Yep,
Uh,
610.
for perspective for the viewers or the listeners, the original Jurassic Park film had about 65 shots with CGI in it, just to kind of put it into perspective for people.
Jesus. Well, and then you look at the newest Godzilla film, Godzilla and
Oh,
Kong: The New Empire. That budget was $135 million, and I think
yeah,
minus one looks way better
yeah.
than that film.
Well, yeah, and it was 135 million, and that's cheap. That's the cheapest of all of the MonsterVerse movies. If you talk about Godzilla 14, that was 160. I think King of the Monsters was like 170 million. I think Godzilla versus Kong was 160 million, something like that. And then so GXK being 135 is actually low for the MonsterVerse, but I mean, half of that movie is CGI. I mean, how many minutes of it is it just Kong and the apes just on screen with no dialogue, and it's all just completely digital. So I mean, I can forgive him for being a little bit less consistent than a movie that kind of takes its time a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And that film was clearly much bigger over here than Godzilla Minus One was, so we'll give it a pass.
Yeah. Different styles, different ends of the spectrum on the franchise, but kind of amazing that within 5 months of each other, those two very different Godzilla movies in totally different languages and totally different styles can both come out, and they both kind of like kill it in terms of, one gets all kinds of awards and is a hit at the box office, and the other one becomes the biggest global hit of the franchise, and it's like this great blockbuster adventure movie. It's like Godzilla's kind of the king of stylistic variety, and I love that about it.
Yeah, he's in 5 months, Godzilla came back and he stole the show. The theaters were pumped full with crowds looking to see
Exactly.
Godzilla, and they're they're already set for another one after Godzilla and Kong. So I can't wait to see if Minus One gets a sequel and where the American studios go next. And it's all going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be very exciting to see. Never been a better time, and of course, Legacy of Monsters is going to be getting a second season and potentially 2 spin-off shows. So I mean, we'll see what happens with Monarch Legacy of Monsters.
It is as we've said before, a great time to be a Godzilla fan.
Yep, indeed.
All right. I'll get into some numbers for you, Chris. I'll run through mine because I know that you said you have some as well.
Oh, we've kind of talked a bit about it, but generally speaking, yeah, we'll get into it here.
All right. Godzilla Minus One led all films at the Japanese box office on its opening weekend with a gross of 1.02 billion yen, one of the highest openings for a live-action Japanese film in 2023. The film's IMAX screenings were especially well attended, exceeding the opening weekend returns in that format of any live-action Japanese film. The film remained in the number one spot in its second weekend and has stayed in the top 10 through 9 weekends, accumulating the equivalent of 36.8 million in that time. And then the budget of what I found between 12 and 15 million dollars. We've heard reports of between 9 and 12, 10 and 12 million. So I mean, I guess that's kind of up in the air, but then a worldwide gross of what
115.
yes, 115 million.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, if your budget was $10 million and you made 115, I mean, great. I mean, I'm surprised there isn't a quicker sequel talk with that kind of.
Yeah, it's superb, especially when you consider that, over here in the US, they didn't, license the film out to someone like, Sony or Crunchyroll or whoever to release it over here and get their cut. Toho International handled all the release over here themselves. And one of the craziest things to kind of put it into perspective is that it came out initially in 2,300 theaters with the intention for a single week release. And then it ended up being in theaters, having ending its theatrical run in theaters on February 1st. So it went from a 1 week run, which was planned, to being a essentially 2-month run at the box office, all of December and all of January. That speaks a lot to the reception it had and the staying power that the film had.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't disagree with you on any of that. Let's see, what do we got? Let's get to the good stuff. The film is rated at 8.3 out of 10 on IMDb, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes based on over 170 reviews, 81% on Metacritic, 90% of Google users liked this film. Godzilla is on screen for 12 minutes or just under 10% of the film, and his first appearance is bright and shining early at 4.5 minutes into the film or around 3% into the film.
Yeah, about 35 seconds in the movie, Godzilla stomping on stuff.
Yeah, literally.
It felt almost instant when you watched the movie,
My mom leaned over when we were in theaters and said that she's seen like the fish, the deep sea fish pop up, and she leaned over and she goes, "That's a sign." I'm like, you don't even watch monster movies. What are you talking about? That's a sign.
Yeah. It's always fun when my dad'll do it too when they kind of they point out something incredibly obvious. It's like, oh, is it a sign that Godzilla is going to be showing up?
Yeah, and then he shows up and she turns to me again and she's like, "He's in the film already?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm not complaining. Watch the movie."
Yeah. And I managed to stay completely spoil free because I remember on the social medias there were people there was like a blurred out image and people were like, don't be spoiling this for other people. And so in the back of my mind I was like, is there secretly another monster in this movie? Like, are they gonna like whip out Anguirus in like the third act and Godzilla have to kill another monster? Like, I was thinking about that. But then when at the very beginning of the movie they have this Dinozilla, I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, that's the other thing people were talking about, not spoiling this whole other, proto Godzilla design that was in the movie. And like, it was just a very pleasant surprise to see it.
Yeah, we'll get into it in a little later in monster design, but I definitely like what they did with this Godzilla.
Yeah, and for you giant monster aficionados out there, apparently the height and size of Godzilla in that opening is essentially exactly what the height or size of King Kong in the original 1933 King Kong movie was. So if you ever want the notion of like, well, what scale would Godzilla have to be to kind of be the equivalent of that original King Kong, it would be it's what we see at the beginning of -1 here.
That is something I did not know. That we're
Yeah,
going to call that a fun fact.
apparently they're both 15 meters, give or take, and so it's like, well, that Godzilla would definitely wreck King Kong, and I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if it's 15 meters. I don't care if it's 100 meters.
Team Godzilla all day
Yeah,
long.
100%.
All right, Chris, do you want to lead our favorite character discussion, or would you like me to go first?
You can lead the character discussion.
All right, the cast in this film is amazing. It might be my favorite all-around cast out of the entire Godzilla franchise, but I went with the main character in Koichi Shikishima just because he has the tragic story. He's supposed to be the kamikaze pilot, and I guess you could say he chickens out. He wants to live, and he comes home, and his neighbor is just bashing him, like pretty much telling him, you're supposed to be dead. Like if you would have died, this wouldn't have happened to our homes and our families, and if you guys would have done your job. And the way he kind of just he's suffering through the entire film. His war within himself isn't over because he feels bad about his comrades and whatnot, and he loves Noriko, but he can't act on that love or what and stuff like that. He wants to marry her, and he has such a tragic story in the film, and it's for him to just. I honestly, spoiler alert, I thought he was going to kill himself at the end, and the little hint that gave it away is just the little backflash where they show him that.
Yeah. So Tachibana, when he's
Yes.
showing him it, he's going, and one more thing, and then they cut away. And me and my best friend are kind of movie aficionados, so we couldn't help, like, one of us turned to the other one, was like, ejection seat. Like, we kind of just thought it on instinct, but you still don't know these things. They didn't actually show it. Maybe it's just the kind of like, and they do everything they can to make you build up to make you think that he's gonna sacrifice himself for the victory, to kind of, because you could see that as a bit of a full circle element of the story. Like, oh, he's seen as a failure at the beginning for not sacrificing himself, and then so in the end he is going to sacrifice himself, but this time it's going to be for an actual great cause that will help achieve victory. And so you could see it playing out that way, but then they don't, and it's a wonderful surprise.
It is. The the story they gave him in this film is why that he became my favorite character of the film. But like I said, this cast is all around amazing. I love every character that is front and center in the film.
Yeah, no arguments on Shikishima being the favorite character. I would agree with that. He's one of the strongest Godzilla protagonists we've had in a long time. But in the name of variety, I'll give a shout out to a supporting character that I liked a lot, which was Kenji Noda, the weapons engineer, the scientist. He's the man with the glasses on the boat. He's just kind of felt like such a vintage type of supporting character that you see in one of these movies. A lot of the Showa films and the Heisei movies will often have this sort of scientist who invents some kind of trick or is helping to solve the problem. Godzilla versus Destroya has the younger scientist character who he's kind of like, coming up with a solution to Godzilla's meltdown and things like that. So I always like when a Godzilla movie has that kind of character, the sort of scientist character who's heroic in terms of what knowledge he brings to the situation. So I always like that kind of role in these movies, and you know, Kenji Noda is a great addition to that roster of characters.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good characters in this. I mean, the captain, the kind of funny,
Akitsu.
Akitsu
Yoji,
is it?
yeah, Captain Akitsu. Captain, and then there's Kid and Doc, and
Yeah, Captain Akitsu was good. The younger kid was good. They like I said, they all flow together really well. It was almost like they were really friends. You know, they weren't just actors portraying a film. You know, each other in a film.
Yeah, and I mean, they said that the director of the film, that he spent something like 3 years just refining the screenplay. People forget that there was 7 years between the release of Shin Godzilla and Minus One, and apparently they did put in the mileage on just getting the script right before they ever got around to making the movie, which is how you want it to be. So people that are wanting a Minus One sequel, it's like, well, you maybe shouldn't expect to get it within 2 or 3 years. Like, it might take a little longer than you think if they let him do it right.
I'm all for it. If it is anything like this first film that he directed, bring him back and let him work his magic.
Yeah, I like to think and hope that maybe even if Toho makes another movie in the meantime with someone else, then maybe for the 75th anniversary, maybe by then we'll get our Minus One sequel, and it'll be like this whole same, cast and crew and continuity and all that stuff, but that it'll have been like they take their time with it, they make it something amazing, like maybe for the 75th anniversary commemoration.
I guess only time will tell. But until then, Chris, do you want to go ahead and give me your favorite score for the film?
Yeah. So I'll cheat and I'll kind of give two, because every Godzilla movie, especially the Toho Godzilla movies, inevitably use some semblance of pre-existing or original or music from prior Godzilla movies. So it's always easy to go with that, but then you also want to try and find something original that the new composer did. So in terms of the kind of the vintage throwback track, Godzilla Suite 2 is has kind of the main march, and even goes back to kind of the extended version of the theme that you hear in the opening of King Kong versus Godzilla. And so that's kind of like and they use that in the climax of this movie, and it's just phenomenal. And then if you want to go for a new addition to the score that comes from this film's composer, which is Naoki Sato, it would have to be, I mean, there's a lot of great tracks, but I would go with the track called Resolution, which is this really long wind up, but then this like great kind of emotional, kind of epic kind of payoff near the end of the track. And that's also used in the third act of the movie. And I think those two pieces of music are just bring it all together for this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually listened to the soundtrack before I went and seen the movie in theaters.
Ooh, wow.
So I heard the Godzilla suites, and I was just like, so I was anticipating in theaters, like, man, when are these gonna drop? Like, when are they gonna use these classic Godzilla like themes in the film? And every time they did, I was just like, oh, that's so money.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
goosebumps. There's just such a power in having Godzilla with his classic themes, and and like I said, I'll never hate on an American movie for doing its own thing, but man, it is such an easy win to just go with new versions of the classic stuff. It's such an easy victory.
Yep. I mean, look at 2019's King of the Monsters.
I know everyone still loves that musical score and they want that composer back. It's like it's such a layup. It's like you would never consider not having the James Bond theme in a James Bond movie, or a Star Wars movie without a little bit of the Star Wars theme, or something like that. It's like they need their music, like Godzilla have his music too.
Yep, absolutely. Like I said, I love this entire soundtrack. If I wasn't going to pick one of the original Godzilla marches, I went with a soundtrack called Divine. It was it once I get into it, it goes along with my favorite scene, and uh, I'll go ahead and go into that right now. It's when the Godzilla is chasing the boat when he appears, and they're kind of on the boat talking big, like, oh, we'll handle him, we're gonna catch the big one. And Godzilla attacks the one boat from underneath, and they're like, yeah, let the Takao take care of this one, like, we're good. And
Yeah,
it's that whole boat chase, the visual
yeah, that
effects,
yeah,
and
that's an excellent track.
the Takao shows up just as Godzilla is roaring, and that soundtrack Divine kicks in, and it's like a eerie like soundtrack with like bells in the background and stuff, and then he attacks the Takao, and it's you see Godzilla underwater, and you see the blue glow, just like in Godzilla vs Kong, as that kind of the theme crescendos, or the soundtrack kind of crescendo grows and crescendos, and he releases his atomic breath from in the water, and that boat is just obliterated. That it's just such an eerie track. I love it.
Yeah, it's almost like a doomsday clock kind of a feel to the music. Uh I mean, that's an exceptional sequence. It's got Jaws vibes to it as well. It's just so good. And if I had to pick a favorite sequence in the film, I would probably go with Godzilla's attack on Ginza, just because it's just sort of the modern presentation of the sort of archetypal textbook iconic Godzilla rampaging in the city scene. He rolls in and he's stomping, and he's picking up the train and throwing it down, and smashing the buildings, and you have the news reporters that are reporting it, and then and then the military comes in and tries to attack him, and then he unleashes the atomic breath again, and at the end of it, you have the black rain coming down, and Shikishima just absolutely raging over the tragedy of what's just happened, and Godzilla almost having this kind of victory roar into the sky with the mushroom cloud behind him, and it's just iconic imagery and iconic music and sound all the way around. And when you see the build up to the atomic blast, and the spines are extending outward, almost like they're the hammer of a gun being pulled back before the trigger gets pulled and he unleashes it. It's just glorious. It's just triple A monster movie making, and you love to see it.
Can we say here right now that that's the best build up to Godzilla's atomic heat ray of like all the build-ups in the franchise?
I think so. I thought it was a really neat thing when 2014 did the kind of the tails at the bottom start glowing and the glowing rides up the back of the spines, and you kind of like see it charging. I think it's like a sort of extension and evolution of that, because it's, again, the spines extending outward become this sort of like ticking clock to what's about to happen, and then they press back into Godzilla, like they're storing the energy, and then unleashing it all out at once, like inhaling into your lungs and blowing out, and it's just great, like monster design work and just monster visuals. It's just exceptional.
Yeah, that is a phenomenal scene. Any scene with Godzilla in this film is phenomenal. And I mean, the scenes without him in it, I love. Like I said, I love the characters in this film. I love Godzilla in this film. But I mean,
You'll never hear me complain about a movie having too much Godzilla, and you'll never hear me complain about, oh, the humans didn't have enough screen time or whatever. But this film does a great job at really executing a strong human storyline that's really gripping in and of itself. Like no one's wrong for wanting Godzilla in their Godzilla movie, but it is a cool thing when the humans can be fleshed out in a way and engaging in a way that you aren't just sitting and waiting for Godzilla to show up all the time.
yeah, this is probably the first Godzilla film where I didn't miss him being on screen. I was full-heartedly into the characters and the story, and like following their path, because I felt like they were like their story was leading me to Godzilla. Like Godzilla wasn't the entire story of the film. It was actually the characters, and Godzilla was just happened to be something that was a part of their life.
Yeah, and also the little girl that they have playing Akiko is like the cutest Japanese toddler ever, so good on the casting director for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
All right.
entire time I was watching this, when it hit Netflix, me and my buddy and his wife were watching it, and she's just like, Japanese babies are so cute.
Whoa, boy. Did you have a favorite quote from Godzilla Minus One? There was plenty of them that I could bring up.
Yeah, and that's a sad thing. There's plenty of dramatic ones and interesting ones, but the line that just kind of felt like in the movie, the first time I saw it, even reading the subtitles, where it just felt like a mic drop moment, and maybe for other people it's not the case, but when they're presenting the plan to kill Godzilla, or what they think might kill Godzilla, and Noda kind of concludes his kind of pitch with, "We will kill it with the power of the sea," in such a serious way, it just felt like so much of a "it's on" kind of a line. Like hell yeah, we're gonna kill it with the power of the sea. That line goes hard. I'm like, that line stuck with me and sticks with me, and I love that line. There's a lot of great dialogue in this movie, a lot of really good lines, but something about that one, it's like the way it's positioned in the movie and in the context of everything, just "we will kill it with the power of the sea," just can't get it out of my head.
And I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about some runner-ups here for us, but the one I chose was Kenji Noda as well. And it said, come to think of it, this country has treated life far too cheaply. Poorly armored tanks, poor supply chains resulting in half of all the deaths from starvation and disease, fighter planes built without ejection seats, and finally, kamikaze and suicide attacks. That's why this time I'd take pride in a citizen led effort that sacrifices no lives at all. This next battle is not one waged to the death, but a battle to live for the future.
I mean, that's kind of the heart of the entire film in a lot of ways. It's kind of what it all is kind of about, and I mean, if there's any one word in the entire film that is just kind of encapsulates the whole spirit of the movie, it's when Tachibana tells Shikishima about the ejection seat and he just says live. Like that's like that alone, that single word alone is representative of a lot of what's at the heart of this movie.
Yeah, this movie, I mean, not a lot of movies can like put me in my feelings or give me chills, but this is one like when
Yeah.
at the end when Shikishima and they all get back to the dock and the kid is like, "You did it. You did it." And they're all like crying and patting him on the back, and I mean, I'll watch it today and that scene will probably get me a little teary-eyed. It's like,
Yeah,
hell yeah, he did it. Like, yeah.
yeah, it's I feel like two of the most of the movies that kind of celebrate like heroism the most are in recent years was like Top Gun Maverick and Godzilla Minus One. Just like people stepping up and having a borderline impossible mission to pull off to save the planet or the country or the what have you, and then they do it, and it's like this sort of like great sort of earned happy ending of heroism prevailing, and like it's very rewarding. People like to see that every now and again. You need movies that deliver that experience to people.
Yeah, there's so much good in this movie. There's so many scenes and stuff and quotes we could bring up, between Shikishima and Noriko and stuff like that, where she's like asking him, like, why don't you help me carry this burden, and stuff like that. Or why don't you let me help you carry this burden? And it's a very heartfelt Godzilla film. Like I said, you don't get a lot of these serious Godzilla films, and this one just it hits the nail on the head, and it's almost in my mind a perfect film. I enjoy every second of it.
Yeah, it's exceptional, and also Shikishima was a total punk because he should have had Noriko wifed up in like 6 months, But I'll just say that, I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he was thinking. I would have got over my grief real quick, but that's just me.
See, and there's another good quote at the end. She asks him, "Can
Yeah.
this war of his finally be done?" That's another little
Uh,
tear jerker at the
oh
end.
yeah, dude. Yeah, it hits, man. It hits hard for sure.
Anybody who has not seen this, get onto Netflix now and spend 2 hours of your time watching this film.
Exactly. It's even in English. There's even an English dub of it, even if you can't stand to read subtitles. Although it seems like nowadays everyone wants subtitles. So you've got the subtitles, you've got no subtitles, you've got no excuse not to watch this movie.
I was just going to ask you, Chris, have you watched the dubbed version?
I did, and outside of the general limits of, I think live action stuff is always going to. I think even the best live action movie with the best live action dub is always going to still sound and seem a little weird because you just mentally and psychologically know that that's not the proper voice for that performer. But I will say that as far as English dubs go, it's a pretty it's a pretty quality performance. It's quite professional. It's performed. It doesn't just feel phoned in. It doesn't feel like someone was doing like anime voice dubbing and then they just put it over live action. That's a little bit of what happened with Shin Godzilla, is that the dub felt a little anime as opposed to live action. But this is a really really solid English dub. It's got to be considered one of the best English dubs for a Godzilla movie for sure. I know that's not saying much because a lot of these dubs are a little hokey or outdated or done by unprofessional, or less professional companies or less higher quality companies in 60s, 70s, 80s, what have you. But like it's a very solid dub. And it's the first way that some friends of mine watched it, and it didn't make the impact of the film any lesser. Like they were still gripped, still on the edge of their seat, still laughing at the humor and wrapped up in the drama and liking the characters. So it did not seem like it was like, oh, you throw a dub on it and all of the power is taken away. It was it's a solid dub. If you prefer dubs, it's definitely not a bad one. That's for sure.
Okay, I have not watched that yet. When I first watched it on Netflix, it started in English, and I was like, "Whoa, no, 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 no!" Changed it back to Japanese with subtitles. I was like, "Nope, get out of here."
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. And I'm typically more of a dubbed guy, and I think sometimes it might just be the way you saw the movie first. And I did see it subbed first, and like especially like all of the showings in theaters are subbed. So like I think just hearing it that way and reading it kind of got ingrained into me. I think I would need a little bit of time for the dub to kind of feel like the standard version of the movie for me, but I do generally prefer to not have to read the subtitles just for my own visual convenience of being able to look at the imagery. But that's just me.
I told I have family members that were asking me about it, and I was like, I would watch it in Japanese first, so because they were like, "Well, we hate when the words don't sync up with the lips," and I was like, "Well,
That's a fact of life. They're not gonna. I mean, I'm sure one day there'll be some AI algorithm program that can make all of the dub dialogue match the voices and the lips of the spoken dialogue, but we're not quite there yet. So
I just had to I had to get your opinion and see if you had watched the dub yet, because I haven't. So maybe on one of these next watches, I'll have to give it a go. I've heard from you and reading reviews on it that it's a pretty good dub. So maybe I'll have to give it a go.
yeah, it's worth a watch. It's not like it's not like, oh, it's so much better or anything. But it's certainly worth a watch, and it's not. I didn't feel like it made the movie worse or took away from the movie or ruined the movie in any kind of a way. It did its job, and it didn't call too much attention to itself where you're like, oh, what are they doing.
All right, well, I'll have to give it a watch, and then I'll make sure to bug you when I'm done with it one day at like 3 a.m. Hey, I finished it. No.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll go through. What was your favorite dub line? What was your favorite dub version of this?
There you go. How about we go into some monster design for the Godzilla of Godzilla Minus One?
Sure thing.
What did you think of his original form on the island, bright and shining early?
On Odo Island, I thought it was cool. I thought it kind of very much had that. It had that more dinosaur look that if someone pitched those proportions and that design as the official Godzilla design for a whole movie, you would say, it's maybe a little too dinosaur, maybe a little too animal, maybe a little bit too, not monster enough. But in the context of this movie, it's perfect because it is an irradiated Godzilla, a non-nuclear Godzilla. It's just sort of this kind of dinosaur-like living mutated creature that carried on and existed. And so it makes perfect sense for it to have those kind of proportions, and it's fun to see for a sequence Godzilla get to be that sort of downscaled and more personal kind of monster that's a bit more on the level of humanity before he kind of gets mutated and becomes the nuclear monstrosity.
Yeah, I almost thought of it as like a badass upgraded, like balls to the wall version of a T-Rex almost. I thought it was awesome, but it shocked me when I seen it in theaters when we first saw it. I was like, what the hell is that? Like, and then you see the little glimpses at a time until you see him actually start like eating the people and stepping on them. And I'm like, all right, this guy, he's gonna get hit with a bomb or some radiation or something to where he's gonna completely change here later on in the film. I was about 98% sure that wasn't gonna be the design for the entire film.
Yeah. And I mean they had kind of shown off kind of enough of what Godzilla looked like in the film proper that you kind of know like he's going to be a little different, his posture, his what have you. It's all going to be a little warped, but I did like seeing that for a sequence, like I said, like the whole like proto Godzilla or Godzilla that then mutates into the quote real Godzilla, like that's this little subsection of the franchise that I actually really really love. So I'm into it.
Absolutely agree with you on that. That is something I have come to love as well. Now, when it comes to the actual or real Godzilla, we should say, that comes on later in the film after the bombings, there's not a lot of Godzillas that I look at that are like absolute perfect designs. I mean, people have heard me talk like, "Oh, this one's great, this one's good." This might be my favorite, but like legendaries, like 2019 Godzilla design from Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Biollante, the original from 1954, and then I would have to say Godzilla Minus One are like all top of the line, as high as you can get, G tier for me. This is an absolute perfect design. The way it regenerates and stuff when like the mine goes off in his mouth and like the CG effects and stuff like that. It looks amazing, and I
Yeah.
love everything about this Godzilla.
Yeah, I love it as well. I think it's incredibly well balanced in that it feels very much like if someone said, "Hey, take the kind of Heisei design," which felt like the kind of standard or the default or the kind of perfected kind of base Godzilla design, like the Heisei design was kind of like the one they used for a lot of years as like the standard issue silhouette and look. It feels like that, but just modernized. Especially when you look at the face from like the front and like the mouth and the way it's got that kind of like we talked about how it kind of like the jawline is sort of like rectangular. It has a kind of like come straight out and straight across and then back. Like it just has that kind of, it feels like modern Heisei, and I really like it. You could say like, oh man, are the spines maybe a little too big or this or that, but like that stuff is ultimately so like not not an issue. There's so much to love about this design. I love the sort of texturing of it, the like the sort of scarring, the scarred hide that they kind of have from the nuclear blast. It's just a great look, and like I said, it feels like the sort of like Heisei for the 21st century kind of design. If they had gone with something like this for like the Millennium Era, like let's say if the Millennium Era had been a series of 2, 3, 4 films, and it had been this kind of look, this kind of design, I think it would have been amazing and iconic. Like it's like a proper evolution of kind of the Heisei look.
Absolutely. And another thing I like about it is like when he's injured or like when the mine blows up in his mouth and then like the tank's hitting him later on, you can see like parts of his skin are a lighter tone from like regenerating. I like that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, and and to see him regenerate that quickly in real time, and that he bears the scars of the wounds, like it just feels like it makes it feel like such a like a monstrous mutated kind of creature, because apparently in the lore, according to the writer director, the dinosaur version on Odo Island had the rapid healing factor, and that's part of what helped it survive the nuclear blast and survive the radiation, because this rapid healing factor was kind of like kicked into overdrive, and that's why kind of what made it kind of turn huge and become oversized and all that stuff. So it's like that's kind of like the logic of it, was that it always had this kind of crazy healing factor, but you mix that in with getting blasted by a nuclear bomb and heavily irradiated, it kind of has like a weird side effect when mixed into that rapid healing factor, and so that's kind of what results in this kind of mutant Godzilla, but still a Godzilla that looks not mutant in the way that Shin Godzilla looks, where it's like, oh, this is like an abomination of nature. Just mutant in a way that still has this, like, it lands on this sort of perfected Godzilla design. I love the feet. I love the walk cycle. I like how still he is when walking until he decides to move a little bit more. Like it just feels, I don't know. I like it. It feels like something that has a lot of weight and just that's kind of like mutated in a way where it's like it only moves in very specific ways, and I dig it.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the feet because that was something I was going to bring up next. And
I know you wouldn't, dude. Outside of Quentin Tarantino, I don't think anyone talks about feet more than Godzilla fans. Like, it's like Quentin Tarantino loves feet, and Godzilla fans love talking about Godzilla feet. It's the foot wars rage every time a Godzilla design drops, and I like these. They're big. They have the base that looks right. They don't look. There was never much controversy with Godzilla feet until G14 kind of had like the elephant foot thing going on. Outside of that, there was never a lot of crazy discussion or controversy about Godzilla feet. But now that's all anyone ever seems to talk about when a new design drops.
yeah, because that I was going to bring up, that they're massive, and I like how you said it feels like he has weight because the sound design in this for his steps, the thudding of it is a very good sound design as well. I like the swimming scene, in the headed towards the climax when he's headed out towards the boats, how it kind of looks like he's almost slithering through the water, with his tail and body, there's so much to love.
Yeah, it's just, you're just kind of delighted every time you see Godzilla on screen when they get the design right and they just get the shot composition right and pull off the effects in the right way. You're just that every second on screen is just feels like visual poetry. It's
Yeah,
just so well done. You're just marveling at it.
yeah. This is a movie where we got spoiled.
Yeah, and it's a fun thing to say because we've talked about these movies and how around Biollante and then into the 90s, like Biollante felt like the last one where the level of effects that the Toho films had felt comparable or on the level of similar kind of genre movies that Hollywood would make. You look at something like Batman 1989 and you look at the visual effects of that movie, the practical the suits, the composite work or whatever, and you compare it to something like Godzilla versus Biollante and it felt like they were more or less like comparable of a sim style. It didn't feel like one was totally destroying and outclassing the other. But then in the 90s that changed and Godzilla movies and their suitmation started to feel very relative to your greatest Hollywood movie with all of the cutting edge CGI. It started to feel like Godzilla movies were always very outclassed. They didn't have nearly as much money and resources and time, and Hollywood blockbusters had infinite money and years of development and all this other stuff. But now it feels like we've come back around where a Toho Godzilla film with a fraction of the budget as any Hollywood movie is looking as good as, and in many cases much better than the special effects and CGI that you see in Hollywood blockbusters, because now Hollywood movies are getting rushed and they're getting way overspent on, and half of them are doing, all these reshoots to re-film the movie halfway through and re-edit the movie, and they're rushing all of the CGI out to make this release date. And here's a Godzilla movie with a fraction of the budget that they carefully planned and carefully made and worked very closely and in a difficult way to fine tune it, and you get a masterpiece at the end. And so it's nice to see. And winning the visual effects Oscar was just the absolute cherry on that, on the top of all that.
Could not have said it better. I am glad you are a good talker and rambler. You are way better at it than I am.
I
You are way
appreciate that.
better with your words.
Yeah, this is just a platform from which I can, ramble and rant as much as I want.
I absolutely love it because you are way better at it than I am. So I will just keep you ranting.
I'll just solo a few episodes.
Oh, I don't even know if we need to go into final thoughts, man. Just watch the movie.
Yeah, we said it all. It's the highest tier of recommendation. It is a G tier film, 100%. The most G of G tiers.
But yeah, final thoughts on this film. I mean, this This, in my mind, is a 10 out of 10 or a 5 out of 5 or whatever Metacritic. It's 100 out of 100 for me. I mean, this is a film that I will definitely go back to a couple times a year. And, this will be something I throw on when I'm home alone or, when I'm bored or when my daughter, when I got her into Godzilla. She came up to me the other day and she points to the TV and I was like, "You want to watch Godzilla?" And she goes, "Yeah, yeah." I turned on Godzilla Minus One and she laid right on the carpet and put her hand under her chin and watched as Godzilla was attacking the city. And I was just like, this is great. She's
Yep.
only 2.5. So I was like, this is awesome.
Yep, you're raising her right. You're raising her right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's exceptional, and it's maybe a dumb joke to make, but if you were to do a sort of, a top 10 list, 10 being lowest and 1 being highest, this movie would probably have to go in the -1 spot. It would go above. It would go above even higher.
This is definitely must see viewing. I mean, every time a couple of these movies is released, they're like, oh, if you're new to Godzilla, here's the 10 that we recommend that you watch to kind of get the lore and history of Godzilla. Godzilla Minus One, in my opinion, has to be in that 10. This is not one you skip from the franchise.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like here and now in 2024, if you're a kid or have a kid you're trying to introduce to Godzilla, maybe you pick one of the Hollywood movies, one of the MonsterVerse movies. But if you're an adult or know an adult who's kind of like on the skeptical side or on the unfamiliar side, and you need that sort of really good movie to serve as the gateway drug, then this is the new de facto choice. It's a one-off movie. It's an origin story. It's a Toho made Godzilla movie. It stays true to the original core of what the original film was about by being a period piece. And so and it just has the pieces of the lore, like a dinosaur that was mutated and stuff like that. Like it has what you want in it to kind of be that sort of that Batman Begins of the Godzilla franchise, that sort of reboot, prequel, origin story for that all new generation. This is very definitive in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, we have said all there is to say. I mean, in layman's terms, this is a must watch. Whether you're a Godzilla fan or not, find some time eventually to throw this on for 2 hours and let it take you for a ride.
Yeah, it's just plain good cinema. If you like Jaws, if you like Dunkirk, if you like Top Gun, it's got elements of all that wrapped together with a Godzilla movie. So definitely worth checking out. Ah, you know what I didn't mention? In the end credits of Minus One, you hear they play the Godzilla footsteps as it's ending. Like you hear the stomp, stomp, stomp.
Yep.
I'm like, that's great. That's so gold.
You know what I thought of that we didn't talk about is what the director confirmed as G cells, going up her neck at the end.
Yeah. We didn't really mention that either. That's okay.
God damn it.
I know there's too much to talk about.
We'd be here for 2.5 hours.
Yep, exactly.
This film, as we've stated, does not have any plans set in stone for a sequel. We have heard rumors, but the next film in the Godzilla franchise was released just a few months later, and that came as Godzilla and Kong, or Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. And we will be taking a look at that on our next Godzilla episode. So, Chris, thank you again for joining me. I know I have been bugging you to do this one I think since I seen it in theaters and we talked about it. I was like, man, this is going to be a fun episode to do on. It's going to be a love fest.
Yeah. This is where we win.
Literally. This is great. This was a fun episode. Thank you again for joining me. I mean, can't wait to do Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire. That should be another fun one. That's a completely on the other spectrum for being a serious film. So it'll be a whole nother conversation when we get to that.
Yeah. Always a pleasure, though. Always glad to be here. Always glad to be talking about Godzilla.
All right. So once again, we have Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire on our next episode. But until next time.